Music Richard Kensington was a man not easily swayed by emotions. A self-made billionaire, he had built his vast empire from the ground up. Every dollar earned was the result of sheer determination, sharp insight, and an unrelenting ambition. His name commanded respect across global boardrooms. His business decisions were always sharp and calculated, admired by many, feared by some, but none of that truly mattered to Richard. The one thing he held closest to his heart was his son Dorian. From the moment Dorian was born, he was Richard's pride and joy. Richard invested all his dreams into him, ensuring he received the finest education, the best mentors, and endless opportunities. Richard didn't just build his empire for himself. He built it with the hope that Dorian would take over and continue his legacy. Dorian was the center of Richard's world. But over time, things changed. Richard watched in dismay as his son became increasingly distant. The love and care Richard had given him were met with indifference. The young man who had once been humble and grateful had transformed arrogant, entitled, and uninterested in values like loyalty, integrity, and hard work. Richard could hardly recognize the person Dorian had become, and it hurt him deeply. One evening, as Richard sat in his study, gazing out the window, a chilling thought struck him. Had he failed as a father? Had the wealth he fought so hard to acquire corrupted his son? This idea took root, and Richard knew he had to uncover the truth. He decided to test Dorian, not with words but with actions. After much thought, Richard decided to disappear. He would walk away from everything, his mansion, his fortune, and his name. He would live as an ordinary man, blending into the background, to see if Dorian would care enough to look for him. It was an extreme test, but Richard felt he had no other choice. The next morning, Richard packed a small duffel bag with just the essentials and a bit of cash. As he left the mansion, he paused for a moment to take one last look at the life he'd built. For the first time in years, he felt clarity. This was something he needed to do. For weeks, Richard wandered the streets, far from the world of luxury he had known. His immaculate suits grew worn, and his polished shoes became scuffed beyond recognition. He slept in shelters, ate whatever he could afford, and faded into anonymity. No longer was he Richard Kensington, the billionaire businessman. He was just another face in the crowd. From a distance, Richard observed Dorian. His son continued to live a life of luxury, driving expensive cars and dining at exclusive restaurants. Richard occasionally glimpsed him through windows or heard whispers of his exploits. It was clear that Dorian hadn't missed the wealth his father had provided. But did he miss his father? Richard wasn't sure. One day, Richard stood outside a high-end restaurant where Dorian often dined with executives. Hidden across the street, he watched as Dorian entered the restaurant, laughing with colleagues. Pain gripped Richard's chest, but he remained hidden. Finally, gathering his courage, he walked into the restaurant. The elegant decor, the crisp linens, and the hushed conversations reminded him of the life he'd left behind. At the hostess stand, he asked for a seat. Her disdainful look swept over his disheveled appearance. "I'm sorry, sir," she said curtly. "We don't have seating available for someone like you." Richard's stomach twisted. He was accustomed to this treatment now, but it still stung. Swallowing his pride, he pleaded, "Please, it's been a long day." But the hostess remained unmoved. As Richard turned to leave, he caught sight of Dorian, laughing carefree, surrounded by colleagues. A pang of sadness hit him. Taking a deep breath, Richard stepped forward and called out, "Dorian!" Dorian turned, his expression shifting from confusion to something colder. "Do I know you?" he asked sharply. Richard's heart sank. Gathering himself, he said, "It's me, your father." Dorian's gaze scanned Richard's weathered face. Without hesitation, he replied, "I don't have time for this. Leave." The cold dismissal shattered Richard. He turned and left the restaurant, crushed by his sons. Indifference. In the following days, Richard lived in a haze. He realized that his son had not only failed his test, but had failed him as a person. Determined to act, Richard contacted his lawyer, Marcus, instructing him to drastically reduce Dorian's inheritance, just enough for him to survive, but not thrive. Marcus hesitated but agreed. "I've trusted you for years, Richard, but this is unprecedented." Richard also hired a private investigator, Olivia, to uncover Dorian's activities. The findings were devastating. Dorian had been involved in shady deals, manipulated clients, and betrayed loyal colleagues. His son was not just selfish, he was unethical. Heartbroken, Richard knew he had to confront Dorian one last time. He summoned him to the mansion. When Dorian arrived, his usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by unease. Richard gestured for him to sit at the dining table. "You failed me," Richard began, his voice steady but heavy with pain. "I gave you everything, and you've thrown it all away." Dorian's voice rose defensively. "I built my success. I worked hard." "No," Richard countered. "You were handed everything, and you betrayed not just me, but the values I raised you with." Richard slid a folder across the table. Inside were legal documents severing Dorian from the family fortune. Dorian's face went pale as he read. "You can't do this," he shouted. "I already have," Richard said, his voice cracking. "This is the last lesson I'll ever teach you. Build your own life from here." Enraged, Dorian stormed out, vowing never to return. In the months that followed, Dorian's life crumbled. His ventures failed, and friends abandoned him. For the first time, he was forced to face the consequences of his actions alone. One rainy night, Dorian stood outside the mansion gates, reflecting on all he had lost. The wealth and luxury no longer mattered. He missed his father's love and guidance. It was too late, but he realized that true wealth lay in family, integrity, and love. As Dorian walked away, drenched and regretful, he resolved to change. The road ahead would be difficult, but it was one he would walk alone. If you found this story eye-opening and full of unexpected twists, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more powerful narratives that challenge the status quo and inspire change. Stay tuned for more stories of transformation and lessons learned the hard way.